Elul, as we well know, is all about doing teshuvah. But there might be another layer that we don't get to speak about so often, and it's alluded to in the last parasha that we read before Rosh Hashanah, Nitzovim. Oivim pasuk, commenting on the pasuk where it says, that Hashem will circumcise your heart and the hearts of your children, state in Targum, the Targum Onkelos explains what does it mean to circumcise your heart. It means that the Eibishter will remove the foolishness of our hearts. Now, what's he telling us? The Parshas, the Targum, it would appear that what the Targum wants to address is, how do you circumcise a heart? How does it fit to use the expression that you will circumcise your heart and the hearts of your children? Surely the term circumcise must apply rather to the foreskin of the heart, whatever that is, but let's just understand the concept first. You don't circumcise the heart itself. There must be some kind of fatty deposit around the heart that would be considered the foreskin of the heart that you have to remove. Previously, the Torah used that expression. It said, you should circumcise the blockage of your heart. So therefore, it would appear that what the Targum Onkelos is bothered by is that this pasuk, rather than saying that Hashem is going to circumcise your heart and the hearts of your children, should have said Hashem is going to circumcise the blockage of your heart and the hearts of your children. Therefore, is a Targum Moisif, which would explain why Onkelos then adds the words he adds the extra word, the foolishness, the nonsense of your heart. Does say in other words. That would imply that Onkelos is seeing this as an abbreviated pasuk. One says Ki'ilu with a pasuk vod gizak v'ferish orlas levavcha, and it's the equivalent. You have to read this pasuk as if that word orla was in the pasuk, because that's what it means, that Hashem is going to circumcise the blockage or foolishness of the heart. Therefore, so great, we get what Onkelos is teaching us. Problem is, why doesn't Rashi raise this question? It's a very clear question. Why are you talking about circumcising a heart? Why doesn't he do the same as the Targum? As we've discussed numerous times. Rashi addresses any question that is relevant to the simple understanding of the pasuk. This is relevant to the simple understanding of the pasuk. How do you circumcise the heart? And so the fact that Rashi does not address this forces us to say, that Rashi says this is not an issue that has to be addressed. Either because there really is no major question over here at the pshat level, or as we've discussed numerous times, Rashi will often not address something if he has already addressed it before. So what is it about this pasuk that does not bother Rashi? So let's first understand why, in fact, did the pasuk not use the obvious expression orlas, the so-called blockage of the heart? Why doesn't it use it? That would have made a lot of sense. So we could suggest, sometimes the pasuk doesn't have to say something in the words of the pasuk itself, because the context of what led to this pasuk already tells the story that we need to tell. So what's the context here? So prior to this pasuk, the Torah told us, when all these difficult things come your way, Hashem, or Moshe says to the Eden, it's going to wake you, and you're going to do tshuva, return to the Eibishter, and start listening. And not only will you listen, you will listen, and your children will listen. And not only will you listen, but it will be with all your heart and with all your soul, absolute tshuva, absolute commitment. Und enoch is the Torah mamshich. After telling us that we've done tshuva and serving Hashem with a full heart, then the Torah continues that the Eibishter will bring us back from Golus. And not only that, he's going to bring us back to Eretz Yisrael. And then it says, then the Eibishter is going to circumcise our hearts. Still says, in other words, look at the context. This reference that Hashem is going to circumcise our hearts is this is going to apply to the Jewish people when they're in a very advanced spiritual state. They've already done tshuva. And what kind of tshuva? With all their heart and all their soul. Now, over and above that, Hashem is going to circumcise their heart. Ha cannot Nitzovim as umol gomer. So in that context, it makes no sense to say that circumcising is olas halev, some kind of a blockage in the heart. They're past the blockage. Because the Yidden at this point have done full tshuva, wholehearted tshuva with all of their soul. Is shown nitob as olas halev tipshus kefir shatargum. So they obviously now don't have blockage in their heart. They don't have foolishness, as the Unclus calls it. Or they don't have what Rashi calls olas levavchem, which is oitem levavchem v'kisuyoy, a blockage of the heart or a cover on the heart. So they don't have the foolishness that Unclus is talking about. They don't have the blockage that Rashi is talking about because they've already done tshuva. As the leib is otem mehavin, they're not in a situation where the heart is blocked to be able to understand Hashem. Therefore, you no longer need to circumcise, i.e. remove that foreskin, that blockage, that cover. And in that case, when the Torah now continues to say, that David is going to circumcise your heart, this must be a more advanced level of how you serve the Eibishter, over and above what we've already discounted, which was that besides the fact that you have to remove foolishness and you have to remove the blockage. No, we're past that. There's another circumcision over here. So this is a positive and an addition to a person's service of the Eibishter. As the pasuk continues, that the Eibishter will circumcise your heart. And what's the result of that? That you will now have something positive, a positive outcome. You will love Hashem. Or same concept in different words. First, we're told in this parasha that the Yidden will do tshuva and they'll serve Hashem with all their hearts and all their souls. Now, of course, if a person is serving Hashem, absolutely, it could be that the motivation for that service of Hashem is because they have fear, either fear of disconnection or they're in awe of Hashem's greatness, but it's motivated by fear. But once the Eibishter now circumcises their hearts, that is going to innovate in their experience. That now not only will they be conforming to what the Eibishter wants, not only will they follow what the Eibishter wants, but they will love the Eibishter in doing so. So now we understand this is a completely different context. We understand why the word orla does not belong here. We're not removing negativity, we're upgrading the positive dedication to Hashem. But what we still need to understand is, how does the concept of circumcising, the whole purpose of mol milah is that you're cutting something off, you're removing something. How does that square off with the idea that the pasuk is telling us it's adding value to the heart, that now the person's going to love Hashem? How does that work? Isn't it moving? And the other thing that doesn't make sense is from listen to the words in the pasuk. The Eibishter is circumcising the heart. Who's the actor here? Not the person. It's not the person who is the one affecting this circumcision of the heart. This is an action of Hashem's. Now, if we're arguing that this umol actually means to come to love Hashem, loving Hashem is our personal responsibility. It's an instruction that every single Jew is given. We have to love Hashem with all our hearts and all our souls, and we repeat this twice a day. It's our responsibility. So which one is it? Is the Eibishter giving us love of Hashem, or do we have to earn love of Hashem? So these are our two questions. How do you say the word milah, which is about removal, is actually to mean adding love? And how's it up to Hashem to make us love Him? Surely it's our responsibility. So these questions are also addressed in the context and flow of the psukim. The psukim, so let's look at the context. What were the psukim? First we said, when these unfortunate incidents happen to you, then you'll do tshuva. Then the Eibishter will take you back. Then he's going to circumcise your heart. All of that are a continuation of something that was detailed beforehand, which was the matzah bilti tov in Golus. That's after the Torah has told us about how bad it's going to be in Golus. And how did the Yidden land up in Golus? The Torah tells us because we abandoned our covenant and commitment to Hashem. On the Torah is metal der Sibbe von Azah Hanhoga. So then the Torah says, and how did we get to a point where we abandoned our commitment to Hashem? Says the Torah. Because you know your history, you were in Mitzrayim, you were exposed to their abominable behavior. So now we're afraid perhaps some of you still have hearts that veer after the things that you had previously seen, and you're attracted to serve the gods of the other nations. So where did it all begin? We saw things we shouldn't have seen, and that motivated us to be interested in those things. Therefore, it makes sense that now, when we're told that the Eibishter will circumcise our hearts, after the Eibishter brings us back to our land, not Eretz Mitzrayim, our land, a holy land. So if the Eibishter is circumcising the heart, that means the Eibishter is removing the original cause that got us into a bad space in the first place, which was the reason we went into Golus. In other words, the Eibishter has to remove the possibility of seeing things that are abominable and being tempted to follow them. And to understand this properly, we have to understand that there are two possible reasons that a person could have a desensitized heart. And then, the fact that a Jewish heart could turn away from Hashem, there are two primary reasons why that could ever happen. In the and those two primary reasons are represented by the two expressions, or lasalev, a thickening or blocking or desensitizing of the heart, or distraction of the heart. What's the difference? Aleph. The first describes that the heart is somehow deficient. As is the or lasalev, there's a blockage in the heart, and we understand in medical terms a blockage in the heart is a severe problem. Dipshus, either like Unkla says, it's foolishness, or an oitem, or like Rashi says, it's a blocking. When a person's heart is deficient, desensitized, then it can be attracted to things that are unhealthy. One possible reason. It's an internal problem. There's an external possibility of an external problem. There's something outside of the heart that's influencing and attracting them, baiting the heart of Rashi, as Rashi describes. That the eye sees and then the heart desires what the eye has seen. That's how people degenerate. Before a person actually has a desensitization and a deficiency in the heart, before any of that happens, the person's not yet foolish, the person's not yet blocked. So if a person doesn't have that foolishness or that blockage or desensitization, they are not susceptible to impure or inappropriate things. So what happens? The person sees something, and what they see, that causes, that arouses some kind of a desire inside the person that was not already there. That's exactly the language, the specific language that our parasha is using. The first step of spiritual decline is when the heart starts to veer. When we describe the heart being distracted, that's not a functional problem inside the heart. That rather describes that there is an attraction, a movement of the heart in an unhealthy direction. And the reason it's moving in an unhealthy direction is because something or someone is enticing it. As the Torah clearly describes the evolution of this process. Because you know how we were all in Mitzrayim. And in Mitzrayim we were exposed to see their abominable behavior and beliefs. And therefore, we're afraid that maybe somebody's going to be attracted to those beliefs because of what they saw. And as a result of that, they'll actually start to serve idols. Exactly what Rashi describes. The eye sees and then the heart desires. So the two possibilities. The first most likely scenario is, I see something I wanted. After that, a person could become desensitized. With that information, we can understand the two things. Aleph, why we're using the expression circumcising if you're actually talking about infusing love into a person. Krisa, cutting off. Because actually when we say umol, in the first instance, what it means is removing, cutting off the possibility to be enticed. How do you remove the possibility of being enticed? You have to sever the link between what you see and how it makes you feel. It's only natural when a person sees something, they're attracted to it. So we have to break that. Which means that I might see something inappropriate and I need somehow an interference that sight will not translate into a behavior. Then, secondly, we need to obey. We need the Eibishter to step in and to circumcise the heart that has become desensitized. We need the Eibishter's help. Maybe a person is capable of removing their desensitization, or his foolishness. But to break the connection between the sight and the feeling that follows that sight, was der Eibishter is an Inyan, was der Eibishter hat nem matbia given. That's how the Eibishter designed us. The Eibishter designed us that what we see, we desire. Therefore, so only the Eibishter can stop that or block that process. So, if we want to stop ourselves being enticed by stuff, we need the Eibishter to do it for us. Those is was the pasuk is mamshich. That's why the pasuk continues. That the Eibishter will circumcise your heart and the heart of your children, so that you could love Hashem with your full heart. Leman chayecho. So the pasuk continues. Leman chayecho, for the sake of your life. What does that mean? Because when the Eibishter gets involved and completely removes the possibility of us being attracted to the things that our eyes see, then the kind of love that we have for the Eibishter is not only with a full heart and a full soul, but it's the man chayecho, it's for the purpose of our life, which means nit stam avas Hashem. Not only do we love Hashem, nor in an Eifen as das wird während der ganze Leben von Aiden. We love the Eibishter in such a way that becomes our whole life. That's what we care about. That's what we do. Von dem Inyan Anal kommt heraus an Afgemin in dem Teuchen oder Avoide von dem Zman, wenn man lehnt Passion Nitzovim Chedesem Chedesh Elul. Now that we have this insight that there are two possibilities, a desensitized heart or a heart that is susceptible to influence, that perfectly fits into not just the month of Elul, but specifically the latter part of the month of Elul when we read Nitzovim. If in pasuk umol avayde keches levavcha vesvav zarich steht in Balaturim. So the Balaturim points out that this pasuk umol avayde keches levavcha, as we well know, as es levavcha ves levav rashatei veselu. If you take those words, es levavcha ves levav aleph lamed vav lamed, spells out Elul. Therefore, we have a tradition to get up very early at the end of Elul or during Elul. And say slichas, he says from Rosh Chodesh as the minikas of Sfardim. Von dem was the Balaturim verbindet Rosh Hashanah from dem pasuk mit Amir slichas is move on. The fact that the Balaturim links the Rosh Hashanah not just to the word Elul, but specifically to slichas, illustrates to us as there is a meforshim teichen pasuk from Mol Gomel al Savedus HaTshuva. Obviously, what the Balaturim is pointing out that this pasuk that Hashem will circumcise our hearts describes the concept of tshuva, and that's in fact how it's brought down in Sforim as well, that this is the concept of tshuva. As das hätten mit dem Pirush HaTargum, as a mol gemes levavcha meint, as man interrupted tipshus alev. This actually works really well with the explanation or the approach taken by Targum Onkelos, that the circumcision over here means to remove the foolishness of our hearts. As we well know, the whole concept of doing an avera is a foolishness, and so therefore to be able to be in a state where we're not doing an avera, where we're doing tshuva, that is removing foolishness. Whereas if you follow the explanation we gave from Rashi's perspective, which is Rashi's view according to the Pshat, as the Uftu von Mol Game drückt sich in der Hemshach, where the whole concept of circumcising the heart is linked not to the concept of tshuva per se, but to have this incredible love of Hashem. Because Rashi is coming from the perspective that the foolishness that you do, you get rid of the foolishness, and then Hashem comes along and gets rid of the possibility of exposure to something that could entice you. That implies that Rashi's view of the relationship between the letters of Umol Avay Lekecha Es Levav Es Levav to Elul is not about Teshuvah, but rather it's not Avodah Teshuvah Slicha, no Avodah Ahava. Rather, that is because Elul is a time where the way that we serve the Eibishter is to work on love of Hashem. Varum. Because Elul is, as the name Elul, in fact, the very famous Rosh Tevis of Elul, shows us that this is a time of love. The most famous abbreviation of Elul is that it's an acronym for I love Hashem and Hashem loves me. I am to my beloved, Hashem is to me. In other words, was doidi is the chayim von Ava. The expression doidi implies love. Und wie verstandig ich von der Moschel hayudu was der Rebbe sagt, as you give me this rachim b'cheder shelo. This is also illustrated in the famous Moschel that the Rebbe gives about how you explain that Hashem's 13 attributes of mercy are most radiant during Elul. This is comparable to a king that people greet in the field, not at home, not in the palace. And the king greets them with warmth and with a smiling face. Needless to say, if the king shows you such warmth and love, obviously you're going to respond with love of your own. So the theme of Elul is tshuva, if you take the perspective of Unkelos and the perspective of the Balaturim, where Umal Avay Lekecha means to remove the foolishness of your heart. Rashi comes along to say, even after you've done that, and you've removed the foolishness, and you've done tshuva, there's another layer of Elul. What's the other layer? Love of Hashem. That Hashem empowers us to have love. How does He empower us to have love? Because He removes the censor that translates sight into desire. V'yer shleimar. As das, was leiten Balaturim is in Avodas Elul, Hamurmez in Pasuk Mol Gamer, nit nichal dem shachakosef le'avo gamer. So now, if you look at the perspective of the Balaturim, the whole thematic connection between the Pasuk and Elul is the circumcising, not the love part. Is because when you're looking from the perspective of Remez, which is the type of teaching the Balaturim does, then the kind of love that you're looking to achieve is actually beyond the avodah that we do during Elul. What does that mean of Agdama? So to understand what we mean that the love of Elul, or the love is beyond the avodah of Elul, the Alter Rebbe says that there are obviously two consecutive periods of serving the Eibishter, Elul and the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and they're different. As Elul is primarily about human endeavor. We have to step forward, we have to awaken from below, we have to reach out to Hashem. Mashenkin de Yomim Neiroim is the Iker Zman from V'doidi Li, whereas Hashanah Yom Kippur is the Eibishter's response, showing us love in return. Zman is Galas Malchusi Yisborach. It's the time where the Eibishter's royalty is revealed. That would be unlike greeting the king in the field. That would be like greeting the king in his palace, where you see the regal nature of the palace. To get in there, you have to be one of the creme de la creme. You have to be elite in order to enter the king's palace, and specifically the throne room. Now, needless to say, when you're exposed to that level of grandeur, the love that you now have for the king is absolutely impaled in your heart. It's inescapable, as opposed to seeing the king in transit, where perhaps the moment is inspiring and then it might pass. Das heißt, in other words, according to the Alter Rebbe's teachings, as the Madregas Ava von Cheder Shelo is nicht so heich wie die Ava was wird gerecht in Yom Neiroim. The degree of love of Hashem that we can achieve during the month of Elul is not as advanced as the kind of love that we're going to or can experience Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. The Ikasman from V'doidi, because that's the primary time of Hashem showing us His love, and when Hashem shows us His love, it embeds it inside us in a very deep and meaningful way. So that would explain the difference between the approach of the Balaturim or Rashi, whether the love is part of the Elul experience or not. According to the Baal HaTurim, it seems not, and the love will come after Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. According to Rashi, it seems that that's what the Elul experience is about. When I'm learning the simple version of Torah, which is an approach to Torah that is accessible to everybody. So that must align with the more accessible levels of serving Hashem. A level of serving Hashem that any person can access. In our context, that means the kind of love that you talk about in Pshat is a simplistic love of Hashem that every single Jew can access. That is available during Elul. So when I'm talking about the entry-level love of Hashem, that is part of how you serve Hashem during Elul. Because it is an accessible level of love, therefore you can experience it even when you're out in the field, when you're not where you should be. Whereas when you're going deeper, and now you're learning Torah from the perspective of Remez, which is a more advanced type of Torah learning, therefore it must be if you're learning higher levels of Torah, you must be talking about high levels of dedication to Hashem. And therefore, in our context, you must be talking about a completely different and much higher level of love of Hashem. That level, that advanced experience of love of Hashem, that follows on after our investment during the month of Elul and after our work during the month of Elul, at the time that the Eibusher responds to us with love, which is Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. On the fire. It's a the beginning of the pasuk that says, therefore, the Baal HaTurim identifies that the first part of the pasuk, which speaks about circumcising the heart, is talking about slichus. That's the Chodesh Elul. That is the avodah of Elul, slichus, tshuva, connecting to Hashem, etc. And then on the noch in the Yom Neroim Shlachrei Chodesh Elul, then when you get to Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, which is after Chodesh Elul, then we can be upgraded to the far more advanced kind of love of Hashem, the love of Hashem that consumes our whole heart and our whole soul.